My mother-in-law literally ripped my anniversary ring off my finger during what was supposed to be a peaceful family dinner at her house, claiming it was too expensive for someone like me to wear and that I was flaunting my husband's money inappropriately. Then my billionaire father-in-law found out what happened and made one phone call to her mortgage lender that resulted in her losing her house within 2 weeks, and now she's hired 3 different lawyers trying to sue us for financial harassment, while convincing half the extended family that I'm a manipulative gold digger who destroyed an innocent woman's life over a piece of jewelry. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hey everyone! I'm Natalie Pemberton, and I'm still shaking as I record this 3 months after everything exploded, because I honestly cannot believe what my life has become. I'm 27 years old. I live here in Willowbrook Springs with my husband Cameron. What started as a celebration dinner for our 3rd wedding anniversary has turned into a legal nightmare that's completely torn apart 2 families and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the people closest to us. I need to share this story because the rumors flying around our community have gotten so out of control that people are literally crossing the street to avoid me. My workplace has received anonymous complaints about my character, and yesterday I found out that someone has been spreading lies about me at my daughter's preschool. The truth is so much more shocking than any of the gossip, and honestly, I'm still processing how one moment of pure greed and entitlement has destroyed relationships that took years to build. This whole nightmare centers around my anniversary ring, which isn't just a piece of jewelry to me. It represents everything beautiful about my marriage to Cameron and the life we've built together. But to my mother-in-law, Vivian Thornfield, that ring became a symbol of everything she felt entitled to control about our relationship, our finances, and our future. What she did to get it, and what happened when Cameron's father discovered her actions, has created a domino effect of consequences that none of us saw coming. I know this sounds like something straight out of a soap opera, but I swear on everything I hold dear that every single word I'm about to tell you actually happened. The dinner from hell where Vivian physically attacked me, the discovery of her secret financial scheme, Cameron's billionaire father Harold making that one devastating phone call, Vivian losing everything she'd worked for, the 3 separate lawsuits she's filed against us, the family members who've chosen sides, and the ongoing harassment campaign that has my lawyer telling me I need to consider relocating for my safety. All of it is real, all of it is documented, and all of it started over a ring that cost less than what Vivian spends on her monthly spa treatment. The most terrifying part is that this isn't over. Vivian Thornfield is the kind of person who sees backing down as defeat, and she's made it crystal clear that she'd rather destroy everyone around her than admit she was wrong. Every day brings some new level of crazy that I didn't think was possible. Yesterday, she tried to get my teaching license revoked by filing a complaint claiming I'm emotionally unstable and dangerous around children. And last week, she somehow convinced a local news reporter that she's the victim of wealthy family persecution and should be featured in an investigative piece about class warfare. But here's what makes this story even more unbelievable. Vivian had no idea when she grabbed my ring and tried to humiliate me in front of the entire family that Cameron's father Harold isn't just wealthy. He's Harold Pemberton, the tech mogul who built Pemberton Dynamics from nothing into a company worth $4. Cameron and I have always lived modestly on our teaching salaries. We drive practical cars, we shop at regular stores, and most people in our community have no idea about Harold's success because we've worked hard to keep that part of our lives private. Vivian knew Harold was successful, but she thought he was just a comfortable businessman, maybe worth a few million at most. She had no clue that the man she was about to cross controlled enough resources to make her financial problems disappear or multiply exponentially. When Harold found out that his son's wife had been physically assaulted by his ex-wife during a family dinner, and that this woman had been systematically harassing his family for months, he didn't just get angry, he got strategic. The phone call Harold made wasn't to threaten or intimidate anyone, it was a simple business inquiry to Pinnacle Lending Group, the company that holds Vivian's mortgage, asking about their policies regarding borrowers who engage in criminal harassment of other customers' family members. Turns out, Pinnacle takes that kind of behavior very seriously, especially when it involves assault charges and documented stalking. Within 48 hours, Vivian's mortgage was called in for immediate full payment due to violation of her loan agreement's character clause, something she'd probably never bothered to read when she signed it. But that was just the beginning. Harold's investigation into Vivian's background revealed financial secrets that even her own family didn't know about, and when those secrets came to light, the consequences spread far beyond just her mortgage. The woman who had spent months lecturing me about being responsible with money and not flaunting wealth I hadn't earned was living a lie so elaborate that it's taken 3 months and 2 forensic accountants to uncover the full scope of her deception. And the most shocking part, Vivian still doesn't think she did anything wrong. Even after losing her house, even after her lies were exposed to everyone she knows, even after being arrested and facing multiple criminal charges, she maintains that she was just trying to teach me a lesson about humility and that everything that happened to her is proof that wealthy families can destroy innocent people without consequence. This story has everything: family betrayal, hidden financial fraud, a billionaire's quiet revenge, legal warfare, and consequences that are still unfolding 3 months later. It's got more twists than a Netflix thriller, and the scariest part is that I'm still living through it, never knowing what Vivian's going to try next. So buckle up, because what I'm about to tell you is going to take you on a roller coaster of emotions, and by the end of this story, you're going to understand why I've learned that sometimes the people who claim to care about your family the most are actually the ones plotting to destroy it. And you're going to see what happens when someone who's used to controlling everyone around her finally meets someone with more power than she ever imagined possible. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm still processing the fact that 3 months ago I was just a normal elementary school teacher living a quiet life with my husband, and now I have a restraining order against my mother-in-law, security cameras installed around my house, and a legal team on speed dial because apparently marrying into the wrong family can turn your entire existence upside down in ways you never imagined possible. Let me properly introduce myself, because understanding who I am and how I ended up in this nightmare is crucial to understanding why everything that happened was so shocking and devastating. I'm Natalie Pemberton, though I was Natalie Chen before I married Cameron 3 years ago. I'm 27. I teach 2nd grade at Maplewood Elementary here in Willowbrook Springs, and until this whole disaster started, I thought I had a pretty good handle on reading people and managing difficult relationships. I grew up in what you'd call a solidly middle-class family. My parents, David and Linda Chen, both work in healthcare. Dad's a physical therapist and mom's a nurse practitioner, and they raised me and my younger brother with strong values about hard work, treating people with respect, and never taking anything for granted. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, and my parents made sure I understood that everything we had came from their dedication to helping people and managing our money responsibly. I've always been the type of person who tries to see the best in everyone, sometimes to my own detriment. My friends constantly tell me I'm too trusting, too willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, and too quick to make excuses for behavior that should set off red flags. Cameron jokes that I could find something positive to say about a serial killer, which isn't far from the truth. I hate conflict. I avoid confrontation whenever possible, and I genuinely believe that most people are good at heart, even when they're going through difficult times. Teaching 2nd grade has reinforced this optimistic view of human nature. I work with children who are still innocent and hopeful, and I see how much positive impact one caring adult can have on a young person's life. I chose education because I wanted to make a real difference, not because of the salary, which, let's be honest, isn't exactly impressive at 40. But I love what I do, I'm good at it, and I've built a reputation at Maplewood Elementary as someone who can connect with even the most challenging students. Cameron and I live in a modest 3-bedroom house in the Riverside neighborhood of Willowbrook Springs. It's nothing fancy, built in the 1980s, needs some updates, and has a small yard where we're trying to grow vegetables with mixed success. We drive practical cars, shop at Target and Costco like everyone else, and our idea of a big splurge is dinner at the nice Italian restaurant downtown for special occasions. We're what most people would consider a typical young married couple trying to build a life together on two teachers' salaries. What people don't know about our family situation is something we've worked very hard to keep private. Cameron's father, Harold Pemberton, is extremely successful in business. Most people in our community know him as a nice man who occasionally volunteers at local charity events and seems to have done well for himself, but they have no idea that Harold built Pemberton Dynamics from a small software startup into a tech empire worth billions of dollars. Cameron grew up wealthy, but Harold and his first wife made sure their son understood the value of hard work and personal responsibility. Cameron went to public schools, had part-time jobs as a teenager, and earned his education degree because he genuinely wanted to teach, not because he needed to work. When Harold and Cameron's mother divorced when Cameron was in college, Harold made it clear that Cameron would inherit his business someday, but only if he proved he could build a meaningful life independent of family money. That's exactly what Cameron did. He became an excellent high school history teacher, coaches the debate team, and has never once asked his father for financial help or business connection. We bought our house with our own down payment, we pay our own bills, and we've built our relationship on the foundation of shared values and genuine love, not financial convenience. I think that's part of what attracted me to Cameron when we met 4 years ago at a regional teaching conference in Cedar Falls. He was presenting on innovative ways to teach historical thinking skills, and I was immediately impressed by his passion for education and his genuine care for his students. We talked for hours about teaching strategies, classroom management, and our shared belief that education can change lives. Cameron never mentioned his family's wealth during our early relationship. He was just this thoughtful, funny, dedicated teacher who made me laugh and challenged me to think differently about my own classroom practice. When he finally told me about his father's business success about 8 months into our relationship, his first concern was whether I might think differently about him or our relationship. That's when I knew he was the one. He was worried about being loved for the wrong reasons, not excited about impressing me with family money. But what's making this current situation so emotionally devastating is that I genuinely tried to build a good relationship with Cameron's family, especially his mother Vivian. When Cameron and I got engaged, I was excited about gaining a mother-in-law. My own mom has always been wonderful, but I looked forward to having another maternal figure in my life, someone who could share stories about Cameron's childhood and become a grandmother figure to our future children. The woman who attacked me 3 months ago and has spent the time since then trying to destroy my life is someone I never could have imagined existing underneath Vivian's initial warmth and apparent care. For the first year of our marriage, she seemed like the mother-in-law I'd always hoped for, interested in my teaching career, supportive of our relationship, and genuinely happy that Cameron had found someone who loved him. What I didn't understand then, and what I'm still struggling to process now, is that Vivian's kindness was entirely conditional on her ability to control our relationship and our decisions. The moment I unknowingly crossed some invisible line she'd drawn about what was appropriate for someone in my position, everything changed. The sweet, caring woman I thought I knew revealed herself to be manipulative, entitled, and willing to use violence to get what she wanted. The scariest part of this whole experience has been realizing how completely I misjudged someone I spent 2 years trying to love and respect. I prided myself on being a good judge of character, on being able to connect with difficult people, and on always finding ways to work through conflicts peacefully. Vivian Thornfield taught me that sometimes there are people who view kindness as weakness, who see attempts at compromise as opportunities for exploitation, and who will never stop escalating until they're forced to face consequences they can't manipulate their way out of. I'm recording this story not just to set the record straight about what really happened, but because I've learned some hard lessons about trust, boundaries, and the difference between being compassionate and being naive. 3 months ago, I thought family conflicts could always be resolved with patience and understanding. Now I know that sometimes the only way to protect yourself and the people you love is to stop making excuses for toxic behavior and start holding people accountable for their actions, no matter how uncomfortable that makes everyone else. To understand how this situation exploded so dramatically, you need to know about the complex family dynamics and the vastly different worlds that collided when Cameron and I got married. The contrast between our backgrounds created tensions that I was completely naive about, and those tensions became the foundation for everything that went wrong. Cameron's father, Harold Pemberton, is what you'd call a self-made billionaire, though he'd never use that term himself. At 58, Harold built Pemberton Dynamics from literally nothing. He started coding software in his garage when Cameron was a baby, survived multiple business failures, and eventually created the cloud security systems that now protect about 40% of major corporations worldwide. The company employs over 15,000 people across 12 countries, and Harold's personal net worth is estimated around $4.8 billion, though he's remarkably private about his wealth. What makes Harold different from the stereotypical billionaire is his approach to family and money. He grew up poor in rural Montana, worked construction to pay for community college, and never forgot what it felt like to worry about making rent. When Pemberton Dynamics started succeeding, Harold made deliberate choices about how wealth would affect his family. Cameron went to public schools, had summer jobs, and learned to change his own oil before he was allowed to drive. Harold's philosophy was that money should create opportunities, not eliminate the need for personal responsibility. Harold divorced Cameron's mother Vivian when Cameron was 19, and while I don't know all the details, I gather it wasn't amicable. The settlement was generous. Vivian received the house, a substantial monthly alimony, and enough invested money to live comfortably for life if she managed it responsibly. Harold maintained a cordial relationship with her for Cameron's sake, but they rarely spoke directly and usually communicated through Cameron when family coordination was necessary. After the divorce, Harold threw himself into his business and philanthropy. He's donated hundreds of millions to education initiatives, veteran services, and medical research, but always anonymous. The Harold Pemberton that most people in Willowbrook Springs know is a quiet, thoughtful man who shows up to community events, asks intelligent questions, and treats everyone with the same respectful attention, whether they're the bank president or the grocery store clerk. Cameron inherited his father's work ethic and values, but also his complicated relationship with wealth. Growing up rich but being raised to live modestly created this interesting tension in Cameron, where he's genuinely comfortable with simple pleasures, but also has access to resources most people can't imagine. He chose teaching because he loves education and connecting with young people, not because he needed a career. His students have no idea that their debate coach could buy the entire school district if he wanted to. When Cameron and I got serious, he was incredibly careful about how and when to tell me about his family's wealth. He'd seen too many relationships change once people understood the financial implications of being with him. The night he finally explained about Pemberton Dynamics, about 6 months into our relationship, he was more nervous than I'd ever seen him. He was terrified that I might see him differently, or that our relationship might become about something other than genuine connection. My reaction apparently surprised him. I was more concerned about whether he thought I was with him for the wrong reasons than impressed by his family's success. I'd fallen in love with this thoughtful teacher who remembered my favorite coffee order and spent weekends grading papers with the same intensity other people reserved for hobbies. Learning that he came from money didn't change how I felt about him, but it did make me more conscious about our relationship dynamics and how others might perceive us. Vivian Thornfield represents everything that Harold worked to prevent Cameron from becoming. At 52, Vivian has spent the 15 years since her divorce cultivating an image of elegant sophistication that requires constant maintenance and significant financial resources. She lives in a beautiful 4-bedroom house in the exclusive Hillcrest neighborhood, drives a luxury sedan that she replaces every 2 years, and maintains the lifestyle of someone married to a successful businessman rather than someone receiving alimony from one. On the surface, Vivian appears to be the perfect ex-wife, who's moved on gracefully from her marriage. She volunteers with several prestigious charities, serves on the board of the Willowbrook Springs Historical Society, and is known for hosting elaborate dinner parties that are considered social events in certain circles. She dresses impeccably, always has her silver hair styled perfectly, and speaks with the kind of polished confidence that comes from years of moving in wealthy social circles. But underneath that polished exterior, Vivian has never really accepted that her marriage to Harold ended. She still refers to herself as Mrs. Pemberton in social situations, despite legally changing back to her maiden name of Thornfield. She talks about Harold's business success as if she played a crucial role in building it, which according to Cameron isn't accurate. They were divorced before Pemberton Dynamics became truly successful. Most tellingly, she's never remarried or even seriously dated anyone, despite being an attractive woman with plenty of social opportunities. Cameron's relationship with his mother has always been complicated. He loves her because she's his mother, and he has good childhood memories of her being caring and supportive, but he's also frustrated by her inability to move forward from the divorce and her tendency to manipulate situations to maintain control over his life. She's the type of person who remembers every slight, keeps score in relationships, and uses emotional manipulation to get what she wants. The most challenging aspect of Vivian's personality is her sense of entitlement. She believes that her years of marriage to Harold, even though they ended in divorce, give her permanent status in his world and permanent influence over Cameron's choices. She expects to be consulted about major decisions, included in family celebrations, and treated as if she still holds a position of authority in Cameron's life that supersedes his marriage to me. What made our early relationship with Vivian even more complicated was that she initially seemed genuinely happy about Cameron's engagement. She made comments about how wonderful it was that he'd found someone who shared his passion for education, how she looked forward to having a daughter-in-law who understood the importance of family, and how she hoped we'd give her grandchildren soon. I interpreted these comments as acceptance and warmth, not understanding that Vivian's approval was conditional on her maintaining control over the relationship. The first red flag should have been Vivian's reaction to learning about my family background. When she discovered that my parents were healthcare workers who'd built a comfortable middle-class life through their own efforts, her initial response was patronizing sympathy. She made comments about how refreshing it was that Cameron had chosen someone from a normal working family, and how she hoped I wouldn't feel intimidated by the social expectations that came with being a Pemberton wife. At the time, I thought she was being considerate of potential cultural differences between our families. Now I realize she was establishing a hierarchy where my background made me lesser than someone who should be grateful for the opportunity to marry into a more prestigious family. Vivian saw me as someone who needed guidance and instruction about how to properly navigate wealthy social circles, not as Cameron's equal partner who deserved respect regardless of my family's financial status. The dynamic became clearer during our wedding planning. Vivian had very strong opinions about everything from the venue to the guest list to my choice of wedding dress. She'd make suggestions that were really demands, framed as helpful advice from someone who understood proper social protocols. When I'd politely decline her suggestions or choose different options, she'd make subtle comments about how some people didn't understand the importance of making good impressions or how certain choices might reflect poorly on the family. Looking back, I can see that Vivian was testing boundaries from the very beginning of our relationship. Every suggestion I accepted reinforced her belief that she could influence our decisions. Every boundary I set was noted as evidence that I was difficult or ungrateful. She was systematically evaluating how much control she could maintain over Cameron's life through manipulation of our relationship, and I was completely oblivious to the game being played around me. The anniversary ring that became the center of this entire nightmare isn't just a piece of jewelry to me. It represents the most thoughtful, romantic gesture Cameron has ever made, and understanding its significance is crucial to understanding why Vivian's actions were so devastating, and why what happened afterward was so personal for both Cameron and his father. Unlike my engagement ring, which Cameron bought using money he'd saved from his teaching salary, the anniversary ring came from a completely different place emotionally. For our second wedding anniversary, Cameron wanted to give me something that represented how our marriage had grown and deepened during those first 2 years together. He'd watched me wear my engagement ring every single day, never taking it off except for the most messy activities, and he wanted to create something that would complement it perfectly while telling its own story about our relationship. The ring itself is absolutely breathtaking, though in a completely different way from my engagement ring. Where my engagement ring is classic and timeless, the anniversary ring is bold and contemporary. Cameron worked with a jewelry designer named Isabella Rodriguez in downtown Cedar Falls for almost 4 months to create something that would be uniquely mine. The center stone is a stunning 2-carat emerald, my birthstone cut in an unusual hexagonal shape that catches light in the most amazing way. Surrounding the emerald are small diamonds arranged in an intricate geometric pattern that represents the way our lives have become beautifully intertwined. But what makes the ring truly special isn't its monetary value, though it certainly wasn't inexpensive at around. What makes it precious to me is the story behind every design element and the thought Cameron put into each detail. The emerald represents not just my birth month, but also the color of my eyes, which Cameron says was the first thing he noticed about me at that teaching conference. The geometric diamond pattern around it represents the mathematical precision that Cameron brings to everything he does. He's the type of person who plans lessons with engineering-level detail and approaches problems with systematic logic. The most meaningful detail is invisible to anyone else but incredibly significant to us. On the inside of the band, Isabella engraved the exact coordinates of the classroom where Cameron and I first worked together during a summer curriculum development workshop 6 months after we met. We'd volunteered to collaborate on creating new reading comprehension materials, and during those long days working side by side, we realized we weren't just professionally compatible but personally perfect for each other. That classroom became the place where friendship turned into love, where we discovered we shared the same educational philosophy and the same dreams for making a difference in students' lives. Cameron presented the ring to me during a surprise dinner he'd arranged at Riverside Terrace, the beautiful outdoor restaurant overlooking Willowbrook Creek. He'd told me we were just going for a casual dinner to celebrate our anniversary, but when we arrived he'd reserved the private gazebo area and had it decorated with fairy lights and hundreds of white roses. The entire setup was like something from a fairy tale, but what made me cry wasn't the romantic atmosphere. It was the speech Cameron gave when he presented the ring. He told me that our second anniversary marked the point where he could honestly say that marrying me was the best decision he'd ever made, not just because he loved me, but because I'd made him a better teacher, a better son, and a better person. He said the ring represented his commitment, not just to our marriage, but to continuing to grow together, to supporting each other's dreams, and to building a partnership that would make a positive difference in the world around us. What made the moment even more special was that Cameron had invited both sets of parents to join us for dessert after he'd proposed the ring. It was supposed to be a family celebration, a moment where both families could share in our happiness and see how much we loved each other. My parents arrived first and they were genuinely moved by Cameron's thoughtfulness and the obvious care he'd put into making the evening perfect. They told us how proud they were of the marriage we were building and how grateful they were to see their daughter so loved and valued. Harold arrived about 20 minutes later, and his reaction to seeing the ring and hearing about Cameron's planning was everything I could have hoped for from a father-in-law. He hugged both of us, told Cameron he was proud of the man he'd become, and said he could see that we were building the kind of partnership that would last a lifetime. Harold examined the ring carefully, asked thoughtful questions about the design process, and made a point of telling me that he could see how much Cameron treasured me by the care he'd put into choosing something so perfectly suited to my personality. Vivian was the last to arrive, and initially, her reaction seemed just as positive as everyone else's. She admired the ring, complimented Cameron on his taste, and made appropriate comments about how beautiful the evening was and how happy she was for us. She posed for photos with the family, toasted our marriage, and seemed genuinely pleased to be included in the celebration. Looking back, I can see signs of tension I missed at the time: the way she held my hand a little too long when examining the ring, the calculating look in her eyes when she asked detailed questions about the design process, and the subtle comments about how much such a piece must have cost. But what I remember most clearly from that evening was how proud Cameron was to present the ring and include our families in the celebration. He'd planned every detail to create a moment that honored our marriage while bringing together the people we loved most. The fact that Vivian used that same ring, the symbol of Cameron's love and our family's celebration, as a weapon against me, makes her actions feel like a violation, not just of my personal boundaries, but of everything that evening represented about love, family, and respect. Over the following year, the anniversary ring became even more meaningful to me. I wore it every day alongside my engagement ring, and together they told the complete story of Cameron's love, the promise of our engagement, and the deepened commitment of our marriage. People would often compliment the unique design, and I loved telling them about Cameron's thoughtful planning and the significance of each element. The ring became a conversation starter about marriage, about thoughtful gift-giving, and about the importance of continuing to invest in relationships, even after the wedding excitement fades. Vivian's obsession with the ring began almost immediately after the anniversary dinner. She'd make comments about how unusual it was for husbands to give such expensive anniversary gifts, how I should be careful wearing it in certain situations, and how important it was to have jewelry properly insured and protected. At first, I thought she was being helpful and practical. I didn't understand that she was studying the ring, learning about its value and significance, and developing what would eventually become a dangerous fixation. The ring represented everything that triggered Vivian's resentment about our marriage. It was expensive enough to represent Cameron's financial independence and his choice to spend his money on me, rather than on things that might benefit her. It was beautiful enough to attract attention and admiration, which she saw as me flaunting wealth I hadn't earned. Most importantly, it represented Cameron's emotional independence, his decision to create meaningful moments and make significant gestures without consulting her or including her in the planning process. What Vivian didn't understand, and what made her eventual attack so particularly cruel, was that the ring wasn't about money or status for either Cameron or me. It was about love, thoughtfulness, and the kind of partnership we were building together. When she grabbed that ring and tried to take it from me, she wasn't just attempting theft, she was attacking the symbol of everything beautiful about our marriage, and trying to destroy something that represented Cameron's love and our family's support. The warning signs that should have alerted me to Vivian's true intentions started appearing about 3 months after our anniversary celebration, but they were so subtle and carefully disguised as concern that I completely missed their significance until it was too late. Looking back now, I can see that Vivian was systematically testing boundaries, gathering information, and escalating her inappropriate behavior in a calculated pattern that was designed to normalize her intrusion into our lives. It began with what I now recognize as financial surveillance disguised as motherly interest. Vivian started calling me directly during my lunch breaks at school, ostensibly just to chat and see how I was doing. These conversations always started pleasantly enough. She'd ask about my students, comment on the weather, or share some bit of local gossip that she thought might interest me, but they inevitably shifted toward questions about our household finances that made me increasingly uncomfortable. She'd ask seemingly innocent questions about whether teaching salaries were enough to cover our mortgage, whether we felt secure financially, or if we ever worried about unexpected expenses. When I'd give vague, deflective answers, Vivian would share stories about her own financial struggles as a young wife, always framing her questions as experienced advice rather than inappropriate prying. She'd say things like, "I just want to make sure you two are being smart about money. Young couples can get overwhelmed so easily these days." The most disturbing aspect of these conversations was how Vivian would bring up the anniversary. She'd make comments about how generous Cameron had been, how important it was to have expensive jewelry properly insured, and how she hoped I understood the responsibility that came with wearing something so valuable. She'd suggest that I should get the ring appraised for insurance purposes, and offer to recommend a jeweler she trusted. When I explained that we already had adequate jewelry coverage through our homeowner's policy, she'd insist that wasn't sufficient protection for something so precious. These phone calls became more frequent and more intrusive. Vivian started calling during dinner time, during weekend mornings when she knew Cameron and I were trying to spend quiet time together, and even during school hours when she knew I couldn't answer, leaving long voicemails that I'd have to deal with later. The messages were always framed as concern, but they created a constant sense of obligation and interrupted our attempts to maintain privacy in our relationship. When Cameron noticed how stressed these calls were making me, and confronted his mother about the frequency and timing, Vivian immediately shifted tactics. She started showing up at our house unannounced, always with some excuse that made her visits seem reasonable and caring. She'd bring groceries she claimed were extras from her shopping, casseroles she'd made too much of, or items she thought we might need for the house. These surprise visits followed a pattern that became increasingly invasive. Vivian would arrive at times when she knew Cameron might not be home during his debate team practice sessions, his evening tutoring hours, or his weekend coaching commitment. She'd claim she was just dropping something off quickly, but she'd always find reasons to come inside and stay for extended periods. She'd want to use the bathroom, ask for a glass of water, or insist on helping me put away whatever she'd brought. During these visits, Vivian would walk through our house with the kind of attention to detail that felt more like an inspection than casual interest. She'd comment on new purchases, rearrange items to be more organized, and ask detailed questions about where we'd bought things and how much they'd cost. She'd linger in our bedroom, claiming she wanted to see how we'd decorated, but I'd catch her examining my jewelry box and looking through items on my dresser with an intensity that made me deeply uncomfortable. The most alarming incident happened on a Saturday afternoon when Cameron was helping his colleague move apartments. Vivian arrived with a basket of muffins she'd baked, claiming she'd been in the neighborhood and wanted to check on me since Cameron wasn't home. While I was putting the muffins in the kitchen, I heard her moving around in our living room. When I came back, she was standing at our dining room table where I'd left my purse and some mail while doing lesson plan. Vivian claimed she'd been admiring our dining room furniture, but my purse had clearly been moved from where I'd left it, and some of the mail had been rearranged. When I mentioned that it looked like someone had been going through my things, Vivian acted shocked and hurt that I would suggest such a thing. She said she'd simply been straightening up the table and couldn't believe I'd accuse her of such inappropriate behavior. That incident marked a turning point in my relationship with Vivian, though I didn't fully understand it at the time. I started being more careful about what I left out when she visited, and I began making excuses to limit how long she could stay in our house. But instead of respecting these subtle boundaries, Vivian escalated her behavior in ways that were even more concerning. She started appearing at places where she knew I'd be, the grocery store where I shopped, the coffee shop where I graded papers on weekend mornings, even the school parking lot when I was leaving work. She'd claimed these encounters were coincidental, but they happened too frequently to be accidental. She'd approach me with this bright, friendly demeanor, but there was something predatory about the way she'd study my appearance, particularly focusing on my hands and the rings I was wearing. During these chance encounters, Vivian would make increasingly inappropriate comments about my jewelry and our lifestyle. She'd suggest that I was taking unnecessary risks by wearing expensive pieces in everyday situations, that I should be more conscious of how displaying wealth might make others feel uncomfortable, and that perhaps I didn't fully understand the responsibility that came with being married to someone from Cameron's family background. The comments were always delivered with a sweet smile and a tone that suggested she was giving helpful advice, but they felt like criticisms disguised as concern. She'd say things like, "Oh honey, you're wearing both rings to the grocery store. I hope you're being careful, you never know who might be watching." Or, "That's such a beautiful anniversary ring, but don't you think it's a bit much for a regular school day?" Some people might get the wrong impression about teachers who wear such expensive jewelry. These encounters became so frequent and uncomfortable that I started changing my routines to avoid the places where Vivian might appear. I'd shop at different stores, work at different coffee shops, and vary my schedule in ways that made my daily life more complicated, but helped me avoid the constant stress of wondering when she might show up next. The most disturbing escalation came when Vivian started involving other people in her commentary about our relationship and my behavior. She'd make pointed remarks to other family members about how she was concerned that success might be going to Cameron's head, how she hoped he wasn't forgetting his values, and how she worried that he was being influenced by people who didn't understand the importance of staying grounded despite financial advantage. She never mentioned me by name in these conversations, but the implications were clear to everyone who heard them. Vivian was planting seeds of doubt about my influence on Cameron, suggesting that I was somehow corrupting him or encouraging him to become materialistic and irresponsible. When family members would mention these comments to Cameron, he'd confront his mother, but she'd always deny having any negative intentions and claim she was just expressing normal parental concern about her son's well-being. The pattern became predictable and exhausting. Vivian would cross a boundary, I'd feel uncomfortable and mention it to Cameron. He'd address it with his mother. She'd deny any inappropriate intentions and make herself the victim of our unfair accusations, and then she'd back off temporarily before escalating to some new level of intrusion. Each cycle made me feel more isolated and questioning my own perceptions. because Vivian was so skilled at making her behavior seem reasonable and making my discomfort seem like oversensitivity. What I didn't understand then was that Vivian was conducting a systematic campaign to undermine my confidence, test my boundaries, and gather information she could use against me later. Every deflected question told her something about our financial situation. Every violated boundary showed her how much she could get away with, and every encounter gave her new material to use in her ongoing effort to position herself as the concerned family member and me as the problematic outsider who was causing unnecessary drama. What happened over the next 4 months can only be described as a systematic harassment campaign that escalated so gradually I didn't recognize how dangerous the situation had become until Vivian's behavior crossed lines I never imagined anyone would cross. Each new violation felt like an isolated incident that I could manage or explain away, but taken together they formed a pattern of psychological warfare designed to isolate me, undermine my confidence, and establish Vivian's dominance over every aspect of our lives. The campaign intensified when Vivian realized that her previous tactics weren't giving her the level of control she wanted over our relationship. Instead of backing down after Cameron's confrontations about her inappropriate behavior, she decided to escalate in ways that were more invasive, more calculated, and more specifically targeted at destroying my sense of security and privacy. The first major escalation came when Vivian started contacting my workplace directly. She began calling Maplewood Elementary during school hours, claiming to be concerned about my stress levels and asking to speak with my principal, Mrs. Rodriguez. Vivian would tell whoever answered the phone that she was my mother-in-law and that she'd noticed I seemed overwhelmed lately and wanted to make sure I was getting the support I needed at work. When Mrs. Rodriguez initially took these calls, Vivian presented herself as a caring family member who was worried about my well-being. She'd ask whether I seemed stressed or distracted, whether my performance had changed recently, and whether there were any signs that I might be struggling with the demands of teaching. She claimed that Cameron was working long hours and she was concerned that I might be feeling isolated or unsupported at home. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had worked with me for 3 years and knew my teaching performance was consistently excellent, was immediately suspicious of these calls. She told me about them after the third one, and together we realized that Vivian was fishing for any information that could be used to paint me as unstable or incompetent. When Mrs. Rodriguez refused to discuss my performance or personal life, Vivian became more aggressive, suggesting that the school had a responsibility to monitor teachers who might be having personal problems. The workplace harassment expanded beyond just phone calls. Vivian started appearing in the school parking lot during my lunch breaks, claiming she happened to be in the area and thought she'd surprise me with a visit. These weren't friendly social calls, they were tense, uncomfortable encounters where Vivian would pepper me with questions about my students, my lesson plans, and whether I felt capable of handling my responsibilities given all the stress in my personal life. During one particularly disturbing parking lot encounter, Vivian cornered me between cars and started examining my hands with an intensity that made my skin crawl. She grabbed my left hand without permission and started turning it to look at my rings from different angles, making comments about how risky it was to wear such expensive jewelry around children who might grab at it or accidentally damage it. "You know, Natalie," she said while holding my hand in a grip that was uncomfortably tight, "teachers need to be so careful about the image they project. Parents might get the wrong idea if they think their child's teacher is more focused on expensive accessories than education. Maybe you should consider leaving these at home during work hours, just to be safe." The way she said these while looking at my anniversary ring made it clear that her concern wasn't about my professional image. It was about her ongoing obsession with controlling when and where I wore the symbol of Cameron's love. I pulled my hand away and told her firmly that my jewelry choices were none of her business, but the encounter left me shaken and constantly looking over my shoulder in the school parking lot. Vivian's next escalation was even more invasive and frightening. She began what I can only describe as active surveillance of our home and daily routine. I started noticing her car parked on streets near our neighborhood at odd times, early morning when I was leaving for work, afternoon when I was returning from school, evening when Cameron and I were trying to enjoy quiet time together. Initially I thought these sightings might be coincidental, but they became too frequent and too strategically timed to be accidental. Vivian was studying our schedules, learning our patterns and positioning herself to observe our comings and goings. When I'd wave or approach her car to ask what she was doing in our neighborhood, she'd quickly drive away, but the message was clear: she was watching us and she wanted us to know it. The surveillance became more sophisticated and disturbing. Our neighbors, the Johnsons, mentioned that a woman matching Vivian's description had approached them asking questions about our daily routines. She'd claimed to be planning a surprise visit for Cameron and wanted to know when we were usually home. When Miss Jinshin mentioned that we typically went grocery shopping on Saturday mornings, and that I often worked in our garden on Sunday afternoons, Vivian thanked her enthusiastically and said the information would help her plan the perfect surprise. Of course, there was no surprise visit, but within days, Vivian began showing up during exactly those times when Mrs. Johnson had told her we'd be engaged in specific activity. She'd drive slowly past our house when I was gardening, park across the street when we were loading groceries into our car, and even followed us to the farmer's market one Saturday morning, staying just far enough behind to avoid direct confrontation, but close enough to make her presence known. The psychological impact of this constant surveillance was exhausting. I found myself checking the windows before leaving the house, scanning parking lots for Vivian's car, and feeling anxious during activities that should have been relaxing and enjoyable. Cameron was equally disturbed by his mother's behavior, but when he confronted her about the surveillance, she denied everything and claimed that any sightings of her in our neighborhood were purely coincidental. Vivian's most sophisticated manipulation tactic involved triangulating family relationships to isolate me and create doubt about my version of events. She began reaching out to Cameron's extended family, his aunts, uncles, and cousins, with carefully crafted stories about her concerns regarding our marriage and my influence on Cameron. She'd call Cameron's aunt Patricia, Harold's sister, and express worry that Cameron seemed different lately, more distant from family and more focused on material things. She'd mention that she'd tried to give me helpful advice about managing household finances and jewelry care, but that I'd become defensive and accused her of being controlling. She'd frame herself as the concerned mother who was being unfairly shut out of her son's life by a daughter-in-law who didn't understand the importance of family relationships. These conversations were masterfully manipulative, because they contained just enough truth to seem credible while completely distorting the context and my reactions. Yes, Cameron was spending less time with extended family, but that was because we were building our own household and because Vivian's behavior had made family gatherings uncomfortable. Yes, I had become defensive about her advice, but only after months of inappropriate boundary violations and intrusive questioning. Aunt Patricia, who barely knew me and had only met me a few times at family gatherings, began expressing concerns to Harold about whether Cameron was happy in his marriage and whether I might be isolating him from family. These conversations created additional stress because Harold would mention them to Cameron, not to criticize me but to understand what was happening within the family dynamic. The most damaging aspect of Vivian's triangulation campaign was how it created doubt about my own perceptions and reactions. When multiple family members started expressing subtle concerns about my behavior, or suggesting that maybe I was being too sensitive about Vivian's well-intentioned involvement, I began questioning whether I was overreacting to situations that others saw as normal family dynamics. Vivian's final and most disturbing escalation before the dinner incident involved what I can only describe as attempted financial espionage. She somehow obtained a key to our house. I suspect she copied mine during one of her unannounced visits when I'd left my purse unattended, and used it to enter our home when we were both at work. We discovered this violation by accident when Cameron came home sick one afternoon, and found clear evidence that someone had been in our house. Items were moved from where we'd left them, mail had been sorted through, and most alarmingly, our home office showed signs that someone had been going through our financial documents. File folders were out of order, papers were stacked differently than how we'd left them, and our computer showed recent activity during hours when neither of us had been home. When we checked our security cameras, which we'd recently installed due to Vivian's surveillance behavior, we were horrified to see footage of Vivian letting herself into our house and systematically going through our belongings. The video showed her spending over an hour in our home office, photographing financial statements and tax documents with her phone, and even going through our bedroom closets and dresser drawers. The violation was so complete and so disturbing that Cameron immediately changed all our locks and installed additional security measures, but the damage to our sense of safety and privacy was devastating. Vivian had crossed from inappropriate behavior into criminal activity, and the footage showed a level of calculated intrusion that revealed how dangerous her obsession with controlling our lives had become. When Cameron confronted Vivian about the break-in and showed her the security footage, her reaction was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire incident. She didn't deny what she'd done, didn't apologize for the violation, and didn't show any recognition that her behavior was inappropriate. Instead, she claimed she'd been concerned about our financial management and wanted to make sure we weren't getting into debt or making poor decisions that might affect Cameron's future. "I raised him to be responsible with money," she told Cameron during that confrontation, "and I have a right to know if his wife is leading him into financial trouble. Everything I did was out of love and concern for your well-being." The complete absence of boundaries, remorse, or recognition of wrongdoing in Vivian's response made it clear that we were dealing with someone whose sense of entitlement had become completely disconnected from reality. She genuinely believed that her role as Cameron's mother gave her the right to violate our privacy, monitor our finances, and control our decisions, regardless of our wishes or legal boundaries. After the devastating discovery of Vivian's break-in and the installation of new security measures at our house, Cameron made what would turn out to be the most consequential decision of this entire ordeal. He called his mother and delivered an ultimatum that was both firm and final. Either she would respect our boundaries and stop her harassment immediately, or she would be completely cut off from our lives with no further chances or explanation. The conversation took place on a Tuesday evening in late September, and I listened from our kitchen as Cameron spoke to his mother with a level of controlled anger I'd never heard from him before. He told Vivian that breaking into our house was criminal behavior that could have resulted in her arrest, that her surveillance and workplace harassment had crossed every conceivable line of appropriate conduct, and that her complete lack of remorse showed she had no intention of changing her behavior voluntarily. "Mom, I love you, but I will not allow you to continue terrorizing my wife," Cameron said, his voice steady but absolutely resolute. "Natalie has done nothing to deserve this treatment, and your obsession with controlling our lives has become dangerous and unacceptable. You have exactly one choice. You can respect our boundaries and treat Natalie with the dignity she deserves, or you can lose access to both of us permanently. There will be no third chances, no negotiations, and no excuses." Vivian's response during that phone call was a masterclass in manipulation that should have warned us about what was coming, but at the time it seemed like she might finally be taking Cameron's ultimatum serious. She cried, of course, claiming that she never intended to hurt anyone and that all of her actions had been motivated by love and concern for Cameron's well-being. She insisted that she'd been trying to protect him from making mistakes that might affect his future, and that she couldn't understand why expressing natural parental concern had been interpreted as harassment. But what made this conversation different from previous confrontations was that Vivian also expressed what seemed like genuine regret for specific action. She acknowledged that entering our house without permission was wrong, admitted that calling my workplace was inappropriate, and even apologized for the surveillance behavior that had made us feel unsafe in our own neighborhood. She promised Cameron that she would respect our privacy going forward, and asked for just one opportunity to make things right. The most convincing part of Vivian's response was her request for a chance to apologize to me directly, and to demonstrate that she could be the mother-in-law she should have been from the beginning. She suggested a family dinner where she could show us that she was capable of treating our relationship with the respect it deserved, and she promised that if we gave her this one final chance, she would prove that the harassment and boundary violations were in the past. Cameron was initially skeptical of his mother's sudden transformation, but I found myself cautiously hopeful that maybe the ultimatum had finally broken through her denial and forced her to confront the reality of what she'd been doing to our marriage. The woman I'd spoken to during the early months of our relationship had been warm and welcoming, and I wanted to believe that person still existed underneath the manipulative behavior of the past year. We didn't hear from Vivian for exactly 2 weeks after that conversation, and the silence was initially more unnerving than reassuring. I found myself checking the security cameras obsessively, looking for her car in the school parking lot, and feeling anxious about every phone call or unexpected visitor. The pattern of harassment had become so constant that its sudden absence felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop rather than genuine relief. But as the days passed without any contact, surveillance, or inappropriate behavior, I began to let myself believe that maybe Cameron's ultimatum had actually worked. Maybe the threat of losing contact with her son permanently had been the wake-up call Vivian needed to recognize how destructive her behavior had become. Maybe the woman who had raised Cameron to be thoughtful and responsible was finally reasserting herself over the entitled, manipulative person she'd become. The dinner invitation came on a Saturday morning via a text message to Cameron that was remarkably normal in tone and content. "Would you and Natalie like to join me for Sunday dinner tomorrow? I'd like to cook your favorite pot roast and spend some quality time together as a family. 6 p.m. if that works for you both. Love, Mom." The message was so ordinary, so reminiscent of the kind of family invitations we'd received during the early peaceful period of our relationship, that it felt like evidence that Vivian was genuinely trying to reset our family dynamic. There were no guilt trips, no manipulative undertones, and no attempts to control the terms of our visit beyond the basic logistical details. Cameron showed me the message, and we spent nearly an hour discussing whether we should accept the invitation. Part of me was terrified that this was another manipulation, a setup for some new form of harassment or confrontation. But another part of me genuinely missed the idea of having a positive relationship with Cameron's mother, and I wanted to believe that people could change when faced with real consequences for their actions. We ultimately decided to accept the invitation, but with clear boundaries and exit strategies in place. We agreed that at the first sign of inappropriate behavior, manipulation, or any attempt to rehash past conflicts, we would leave immediately without explanation or apology. We also decided to limit the visit to 2 hours maximum, regardless of how well things went, and to drive separately so that neither of us would be trapped if the situation became uncomfortable. Sunday afternoon arrived, and I spent far too much time getting ready, trying to strike the right balance between looking nice enough to show respect for the occasion, but not so dressed up that Vivian might make comments about my appearance or jewelry choices. I ultimately decided to wear a simple navy dress and my engagement ring, but left the anniversary ring at home, not wanting to provide any triggers for the kind of obsessive behavior that had characterized so many of our recent interactions. The drive to Vivian's house in Hillcrest was tense despite our attempts to stay optimistic. Cameron kept reassuring me that we were in control of the situation and could leave at any time, but I could see his own anxiety in the way he gripped the steering wheel and checked his phone repeatedly for any last-minute messages that might change our plan. When we pulled into Vivian's driveway at exactly 6 p.m., everything appeared perfectly normal and welcoming. The house looked beautiful in the early autumn light, with carefully maintained landscaping and warm lights glowing in the window. Vivian's car was in the garage, and there were no signs of the surveillance equipment or unusual activity that had characterized her recent behavior. Vivian herself answered the door looking like the version of herself I remembered from our early relationship. Hairstyled but not overdone, wearing a flattering but casual dress, and greeting us with what appeared to be genuine warmth and happiness. She hugged Cameron enthusiastically, kissed my cheek in a way that felt natural rather than performative, and immediately began talking about how excited she was to spend time with us, and how much she'd missed our family dinner. The first hour of the evening was remarkably pleasant, and felt like a return to the family dynamic I'd hoped we could build when Cameron and I first got married. Vivian asked thoughtful questions about my students, without any of the inappropriate probing that had characterized her recent calls to my work. She inquired about Cameron's debate team with genuine interest, rather than using the conversation as an opportunity to make pointed comments about our time management or priority. Most importantly, Vivian seemed to be making a conscious effort not to focus on my appearance, my jewelry, or any of the topics that had triggered her obsessive behavior in recent months. She complimented my dress in a way that felt sincere and appropriate, mentioned that I looked happy and relaxed, and seemed genuinely interested in hearing about our recent weekend trip to Cedar Falls, without any undercurrent of financial surveillance or inappropriate question. The pot roast dinner was delicious, the conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time in over a year I found myself relaxing in Vivian's presence, and remembering why I'd initially been excited about having her as a mother-in-law. She shared funny stories about Cameron's childhood, asked about my parents in a way that suggested genuine interest in my family background, and seemed to be making a real effort to treat me as her son's equal partner rather than as someone who needed her guidance or approval. As we finished the main course and Vivian suggested moving to the living room for dessert and coffee, I actually found myself feeling grateful that we'd decided to give her this second chance. Maybe people really could change when they understood the consequences of their action. Maybe the threat of losing Cameron permanently had forced Vivian to confront her behavior and commit to building a healthier relationship with both of us. I was completely unprepared for what was about to happen in the kitchen, and I think that sense of false security made the attack even more shocking and traumatic when Vivian's carefully constructed facade finally dropped and revealed the calculated predator who had been planning this moment for weeks. The attack came without any warning, during what should have been the most innocent moment of the entire evening. Vivian had suggested that we move to the living room for dessert, and she asked if I'd mind helping her carry the coffee service and her famous apple crumb cake from the kitchen. It seemed like such a normal request, the kind of thing any hostess might ask a guest to help with, and I was actually pleased that she was including me in the hosting duties like she would with any other family member. I followed Vivian into her spacious kitchen, where she already had everything beautifully arranged on a silver serving tray, delicate china coffee cups, cream and sugar in matching porcelain containers, and generous slices of cake on her best dessert plate. The kitchen smelled wonderfully of coffee and cinnamon, and everything about the scene felt warm and familial in a way that made me let my guard down completely. "Natalie, would you mind taking the coffee pot while I carry the tray?" Vivian asked, her voice still carrying the same pleasant tone she'd maintained throughout dinner. I moved toward the counter to pick up the coffee pot, and that's when everything changed in the span of about 3 seconds. As I reached for the coffee pot, Vivian suddenly grabbed my left wrist with a grip that was shockingly strong and completely unexpected. Before I could react or even understand what was happening, she was pulling my hand toward her and examining my rings with an intensity that was immediately terrifying. "Where is it?" she demanded, her voice completely different from the warm maternal tone she'd been using all evening. The transformation was so sudden and complete that for a moment, I couldn't even process what was happening. This wasn't the woman who had just served us dinner and shared pleasant conversation. This was someone else entirely, someone cold and predatory and completely focused on my hand. "Where's what?" I managed to ask, trying to pull my wrist free from her grip, but Vivian's fingers were like a vice around my arm, and she was examining my engagement ring with the kind of detailed attention that made my skin crawl. "The anniversary ring," she said, her eyes fixed on my left hand with an obsession that was genuinely frightening. "You're only wearing the engagement ring. Where is the anniversary ring that Cameron spent $12,000 on? The one with the emerald that you flaunt everywhere you go?" The way she said flaunt was loaded with so much venom that I finally understood this entire evening had been a setup. The pleasant dinner, the normal conversation, the apparent transformation in her behavior, it had all been an elaborate performance designed to get me comfortable enough to lower my defenses for this moment. "I left it at home," I said, still trying to free my wrist from her grip. "Vivian, you're hurting me. Let go of my hand right now." But instead of releasing me, Vivian's grip tightened, and she started pulling me toward her with a force that was both painful and terrifying. "You left it at home. Why would you leave such an expensive piece of jewelry at home unless you were planning something, unless you knew I might have something to say about how inappropriately you've been wearing it?" The accusation was so bizarre and disconnected from reality that I couldn't even formulate a response. I'd left the anniversary ring at home specifically to avoid triggering any of Vivian's obsessive behavior, but somehow she'd interpreted this as evidence of some kind of deception or planning on my part. "Vivian, let go of me right now," I said more firmly, using my free hand to try to pry her fingers off my wrist. "You're hurting me and you're scaring me. We need to go back to the living room with Cameron." That's when Vivian said something that revealed the true depth of her delusion and entitlement. "That ring belongs with someone who understands its value and importance. Cameron worked himself to exhaustion to buy you something beautiful, and you treat it like a toy, wearing it to inappropriate places and using it to show off to people who could never afford anything like it." The irony was breathtaking. Here was a woman who had spent months obsessing over my anniversary ring, following me to see when I wore it. making inappropriate comments about my jewelry choices, and now she was claiming that I was the one treating it inappropriately. Cameron gave me that ring because he loves me, I said, my voice shaking with a combination of fear and anger. How I choose to wear it is between my husband and me, and it's none of your business. That's when Vivian's behavior escalated to something I never could have imagined. Still gripping my wrist with one hand, she reached into her purse with the other, and pulled out what I immediately recognized as my anniversary ring. The emerald caught the kitchen light exactly the way it did when I wore it, and seeing it in Vivian's possession was like a physical blow to my stomach. "You took my ring," I whispered, the reality of what was happening finally sinking in. "You broke into our house and stole my anniversary ring." Vivian's expression didn't show any shame or recognition that she'd done something wrong. Instead, she looked triumphant, like she'd finally accomplished something she'd been planning for months. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice calm in a way that was more terrifying than if she'd been shouting. "I rescued it from someone who doesn't deserve to wear it." She held up my ring, turning it so the emerald caught the light, and the possessive way she examined it made me feel physically sick. "This ring represents Cameron's hard work and sacrifice, and it should be with someone who truly appreciates what it means. Someone who understands the responsibility that comes with wearing something so precious." The delusion was complete and terrifying. Vivian had stolen my anniversary ring and convinced herself that she was somehow saving it from me, that she had more right to possess the symbol of Cameron's love than I did. The woman who had raised Cameron to be honest and responsible was standing in her kitchen holding stolen jewelry and claiming moral superiority. "That ring belongs to me," I said, reaching for it with my free hand. "Cameron gave it to me, and you have no right to take it." But Vivian pulled the ring away from my reach and continued holding my wrist in a grip that was getting tighter and more painful. "Cameron gave this to you because he didn't understand how carelessly you would treat it. He thought you would treasure it the way it deserves to be treasured, but instead you wear it to grocery stores and school like it's costume jewelry." The accusations were getting more bizarre and disconnected from reality with each sentence. I'd never treated my anniversary ring carelessly. I'd worn it every day because I loved it and because it reminded me of Cameron's thoughtfulness. The idea that wearing jewelry you love is somehow disrespectful to it was so twisted that I couldn't even follow the logic. "Vivian, you're completely wrong about this," I said, my voice getting louder as my fear turned to anger. "I treasure that ring exactly because Cameron gave it to me. It means everything to me, and you have no right to judge how I choose to wear it or where I choose to wear it." That's when Vivian did something that still gives me nightmares when I think about it. She slipped my anniversary ring onto her own finger, holding up her hand to admire how it looked, and smiled with a satisfaction that was genuinely chilling. "It looks better on someone who understands its value," she said, examining the ring on her finger like she was trying it on in a jewelry store. "Someone who would treat it with the respect it deserves instead of using it to show off." The sight of my anniversary ring on Vivian's finger, combined with her complete lack of recognition that she'd done anything wrong, triggered something in me that was pure rage. This wasn't just theft, it was a violation of everything the ring represented about my marriage, my relationship with Cameron, and the family celebration we'd shared when he gave it to me. "Take it off right now," I demanded, using my free hand to grab at her wrist. "That ring belongs to me, and if you don't give it back immediately, I'm calling the police." But Vivian wasn't intimidated by my anger or my threats. If anything, she seemed energized by my distress, like she was finally getting the reaction she'd been trying to provoke for months. "Go ahead and call the police," she said with a smile that was pure malice. "Tell them that your mother-in-law is protecting valuable family property from someone who doesn't appreciate it." The complete disconnect from reality was terrifying. But what happened next was even worse. Vivian started backing toward the kitchen door, still wearing my ring and still gripping my wrist, apparently planning to leave the kitchen and continue this confrontation in front of Cameron. "We're going to go into the living room," she said, her voice taking on a commanding tone that suggested she thought she was in control of this situation. "And you're going to explain to Cameron why you left your anniversary ring at home and why you've been so careless with his generous gift. Then we're going to discuss how valuable jewelry should be properly cared for and protected." That's when I realized that Vivian's plan wasn't just to steal my ring, it was to use it as evidence in some twisted confrontation where she would position herself as the responsible family member and me as the careless, ungrateful wife who needed her guidance and correction. I started screaming for Cameron at the top of my lungs, not just because I needed help, but because I knew that whatever Vivian was planning to do next was going to be even worse than what had already happened. The sound of my screaming brought Cameron running into the kitchen so fast that he nearly collided with the door frame. What he saw when he burst through the door was his mother gripping my wrist with visible force, me trying to pull away from her, and most shockingly, his mother wearing my anniversary ring on her finger while I was clearly in distress. "What the hell is going on?" Cameron demanded, his voice carrying a level of alarm I'd never heard before. He immediately moved toward us, and I could see him processing the scene. His mother's aggressive grip on my arm, the tears streaming down my face, and the unmistakable glint of my emerald anniversary ring on Vivian's finger. "Your mother stole my ring," I managed to say through my tears, still trying to free my wrist from Vivian's grip. "She broke into our house and took it, and now she's wearing it and saying I don't deserve it." But Vivian, even caught in this completely indefensible situation, immediately shifted into victim mode with a skill that was both impressive and terrifying. Her grip on my wrist loosened slightly, though she didn't let go completely, and her expression transformed from predatory satisfaction to wounded confusion. "Cameron, honey, I was trying to help," she said, her voice taking on that trembling maternal tone that had worked so many times before. "Natalie left her beautiful anniversary ring at home tonight. And when I asked her about it, she became defensive and started accusing me of terrible things. I was just trying to show her how precious this ring is, and how it should be treated with proper respect." The audacity was breathtaking. Vivian was wearing stolen jewelry, had physically restrained me against my will, and was now trying to frame the entire situation as her attempt to educate me about jewelry care. But this time, Cameron wasn't falling for her manipulation. "Mom, let go of Natalie's wrist right now," he said, his voice deadly calm in a way that was more threatening than shouting. "And take off her ring immediately. I don't care what your justification is. You don't put your hands on my wife and you don't take her jewelry." For a moment, Vivian seemed to consider whether her usual tactics might still work. She looked between Cameron and me, apparently calculating whether she could convince her son that I was the problem in this situation. But something in Cameron's expression must have told her that this time was different, because she finally released my wrist. However, she didn't remove my ring. Instead, she held up her hand so Cameron could see it clearly, and what she said next revealed the true depth of her delusion. "Look how beautiful it is, Cameron. Look how it sparkles when it's worn by someone who truly appreciates fine jewelry. Doesn't it look better on someone who understands its value?" The sight of his mother wearing his wife's anniversary ring, while asking him to admire how it looked on her, was apparently the breaking point for Cameron. I watched his face go through several emotions: shock, disgust, and finally a cold fury that I'd never seen before. "Take it off now," he said, each word pronounced with perfect clarity. "That ring belongs to my wife. I gave it to her because I love her, and the fact that you think it looks better on you shows how completely you've lost touch with reality." But Vivian still wasn't backing down. "Cameron, you don't understand what I'm trying to tell you," she continued, apparently believing she could still convince him that her actions were justified. "This ring represents your hard work and sacrifice. It should be protected and cherished, not worn carelessly to inappropriate places by someone who doesn't understand its significance." That's when Cameron said something that changed the entire dynamic of our family relationships. "Mom, I'm calling the police. What you've done is theft, and I won't allow you to steal from my wife and then try to justify it as family concern." The transformation in Vivian's demeanor when Cameron mentioned police was immediate and dramatic. The wounded, caring mother persona disappeared completely, replaced by something cold and calculating that was genuinely frightening. "You wouldn't dare call the police on your own mother," she said, her voice taking on a threatening tone. "Not over some spoiled princess who's turned you against your own family. Not over a piece of jewelry that you could easily replace with your father's money." The mask had finally come off completely. Vivian was no longer pretending that her actions were motivated by care or concern. She was revealing the entitled, manipulative person who believed that being Cameron's mother gave her the right to control our lives and take our possessions without consequence. Cameron pulled out his phone and started dialing 911, and that's when Vivian's behavior became even more erratic and dangerous. She started backing toward the kitchen's back door, still wearing my ring, apparently planning to leave rather than face the consequences of her action. "If you call the police on me, you'll never see me again," she threatened, her voice rising to nearly a shriek. "Is that what you want, to destroy your relationship with your mother over this manipulative woman who's poisoned you against your own family?" But Cameron was already speaking to the 911 dispatcher, clearly and calmly reporting that his mother had stolen jewelry from his wife and was currently in his mother's house, wearing the stolen property. The dispatcher asked several questions about whether anyone was in immediate physical danger, whether the suspect was still on the premises, and whether there were any weapons involved. While Cameron was on the phone with emergency services, Vivian made what was perhaps the most revealing statement of the entire ordeal. "Fine," she said, finally pulling my ring off her finger but holding it up like a trophy. "But don't think this is over. That ring belongs with someone who deserves it, and I won't let you forget that you chose her over your own mother." She threw my anniversary ring across the kitchen floor, where it skittered under the refrigerator, apparently thinking that destroying or hiding it would somehow prove her point about my unworthiness to wear it. The casualness with which she treated something so precious to me, after claiming she was trying to protect it, revealed that her obsession had never been about the ring's value. It had been about control and punishment. The police arrived within 12 minutes of Cameron's call, and Vivian's behavior during their initial questioning was a masterclass in manipulation that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so disturbing. Officer Williams and Officer Martinez were both professional and thorough, but Vivian immediately began working to control the narrative. "Officers, I'm so glad you're here," she said, her voice taking on that trembling elderly victim tone that had fooled so many people before. "I'm afraid my daughter-in-law has been having some kind of emotional crisis, and she's making accusations that are very concerning for my family." She told the officers that I'd become hysterical when she'd asked innocent questions about my jewelry, that I'd accused her of stealing when she'd simply been admiring my anniversary ring, and that she was worried about my mental state and how it might be affecting her son's well-being. But this time, Vivian's manipulation tactics ran into the problem of physical evidence and witness testimony. Cameron immediately told the officers about finding my ring under the refrigerator where his mother had thrown it, about the security footage from our house showing Vivian breaking in and going through our belongings, and about the months of escalating harassment that had led up to this incident. When Officer Martinez asked Vivian to explain how my anniversary ring had ended up in her possession, her story began falling apart immediately. She claimed that I'd left it at her house during a previous visit, and that she'd been trying to return it, but she couldn't explain why she'd been wearing it or why she'd thrown it across the floor when confronted. The officers also noticed the red marks on my wrist where Vivian had gripped me, and when they asked about those injuries, Vivian's explanation became even more convoluted and unbelievable. She claimed that I'd grabbed her first and that she'd only held my wrist to prevent me from hurting myself during my emotional episode. Officer Williams asked Cameron and me to provide our account of what had happened, and as we described the evening's events in detail, I could see the officers recognizing the classic patterns of domestic harassment and manipulation. When Cameron mentioned the security footage of Vivian breaking into our house, both officers became significantly more serious about the situation. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us to answer some more questions," Officer Martinez told Viv. "Breaking and entering, theft and assault are serious charges, and we need to get a complete statement from you about these allegations." Vivian's reaction to being told she was going to be questioned at the police station was the final proof of how disconnected from reality her behavior had become. She looked genuinely shocked that there might be consequences for her actions, as if the idea that stealing jewelry and physically restraining someone might be considered criminal had never occurred to her. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice taking on an indignant tone. "I'm being persecuted for trying to protect family property. My son spent thousands of dollars on that ring, and I was just trying to make sure it was being properly cared for." Even facing arrest, Vivian was still trying to frame theft and assault as family concern, still believing that her role as Cameron's mother gave her the right to control our possessions and our lives regardless of legal or social boundary. The phone call that would change everything came at 7:30 the next morning. Cameron and I were still processing the trauma of the previous evening. Vivian had been arrested and charged with theft, breaking and entering, and assault, and we'd spent hours at the police station, giving detailed statements about months of harassment that had culminated in the ring theft. We were emotionally drained, barely sleeping, and trying to figure out how to move forward when Cameron's phone rang. It was Harold, and the tone of his voice when Cameron answered was unlike anything I'd ever heard from my typically calm and measured father-in-law. "Cameron, I just got a call from my attorney," Harold said, his voice carrying a cold fury that was genuinely frightening. "He has contacts in the police department, and he told me about what happened last night. I need you to tell me everything, right now." Cameron put the phone on speaker, and over the next 30 minutes we walked Harold through the entire ordeal, from Vivian's months of escalating harassment to the break-in we'd discovered, to the staged dinner that ended with her stealing my anniversary ring and physically attacking me in her kitchen. Harold listened without interruption, asking only occasional clarifying questions about specific dates, incidents, and details. When we finished recounting the events, there was a long silence before Harold spoke again. "Vivian made a critical error in judgment," he said, his voice carrying the kind of controlled rage that had built a billion-dollar empire. "She apparently forgot that when you attack my son's wife, you attack my family. And people who attack my family discover very quickly that there are consequences they never anticipated." Harold's response wasn't motivated by revenge or personal vindictiveness. It was the calculated reaction of a man who had spent decades protecting the people he loved from threats they couldn't handle themselves. Vivian had crossed a line that Harold considered unforgivable, and she was about to discover that the quiet businessman she thought she knew was actually one of the most powerful men in the technology industry. "I'm going to make some phone calls," Harold told us. "Vivian clearly believes that there are no real consequences for her behavior, and it's time she learned otherwise. Cameron, I need you and Natalie to document every incident of harassment you can remember, dates, times, witnesses, anything that shows the pattern of her behavior. I'm going to need that information very soon." Harold's first call was to Marcus Webb, the head of his corporate security team, a former FBI investigator who specialized in comprehensive background investigation. Within hours, Marcus had deployed the kind of investigative resources that most people don't even know exist. And what they discovered about Vivian's life was both shocking and entirely predictable. The investigation revealed that Vivian had been living a carefully constructed lie for years, maintaining a facade of financial stability and social respectability while actually drowning in debt and engaging in increasingly desperate schemes to maintain her lifestyle. The woman who had spent months lecturing me about financial responsibility and making pointed comments about young people living beyond their means was herself a textbook example of someone whose spending had spiraled completely out of control. Vivian's financial situation was far worse than even Harold had suspected. She had accumulated over $89,000 in credit card debt across 11 different accounts, many of which had been opened in the past 2 years as her spending accelerated. She'd been using cash advances from one card to make minimum payments on others, creating a house of cards that was mathematically impossible to sustain. But the most damaging discovery was that Vivian had been systematically lying to everyone in her life about her income and expense. She'd told her family, friends, and creditors that her part-time consulting work was bringing in substantial income, when in reality she'd lost most of her clients due to poor performance and unreliable service. Her actual income for the previous year had been less than $18,000, while her expenses exceeded $95,000. The investigation also revealed that Vivian had been engaging in more serious financial fraud than just overspend. She'd forged Harold's signature on several documents during their divorce proceedings, claiming assets that weren't actually part of the settlement. She'd also been using Harold's name and reputation to secure credit and business relationships without his knowledge or permission, essentially trading on his success while damaging his reputation in certain business circles. Most significantly, Marcus discovered that Vivian had been lying about her housing situation for over 2 years. The beautiful house in Hillcrest that she'd used to maintain her image of success was actually in foreclosure, with payments that were 6 months behind. She'd been intercepting bank correspondence and hiding the true status of her mortgage from everyone who knew her, apparently believing she could somehow resolve the situation before anyone discovered the truth. Harold's response to these discoveries was swift and surgical. His first call was to Thomas Richardson, the president of Pinnacle Lending Group, the company that held Vivian's mortgage. Harold and Thomas had a business relationship dating back 15 years. Pemberton Dynamics provided the cybersecurity systems that protected Pinnacle's customer data and financial transactions. The conversation between Harold and Thomas was brief and professional. Harold explained that his former wife had been engaging in criminal harassment of his family, that she'd been arrested for theft and assault, and that he wanted to understand what options existed for addressing borrowers who engaged in criminal behavior that might affect the bank's reputation or liability. Thomas was immediately concerned about the potential exposure. Pinnacle Lending Group had strict policies about borrowers who engaged in criminal activity, particularly when that activity involved fraud or harassment. When Harold mentioned that Vivian had been using Harold's name and reputation in ways that might create liability issues for anyone doing business with her, Thomas assured him that the bank would conduct an immediate review of her account. The review took less than 48 hours, and what Pinnacle discovered was grounds for immediate action. Vivian's mortgage application had contained several material misrepresentations about her income, her debts, and her relationship to Harold's business interests. She'd also violated several clauses in her loan agreement that related to criminal activity and maintaining the property's value and condition. On Thursday morning, exactly 4 days after her arrest, Vivian received a certified letter from Pinnacle Lending Group, informing her that her mortgage was being called in for immediate full payment due to material breaches of her loan agreement. She had 30 days to pay the outstanding balance of $37,000 or face foreclosure proceedings. But Harold wasn't finished. His next call was to Rebecca Martinez, the managing partner at Castellano & Associates, the law firm that handled legal affairs for several of his business ventures. Rebecca specialized in complex litigation and had a reputation for thoroughness that bordered on ruthlessness when protecting her clients' interests. Harold asked Rebecca to conduct a comprehensive legal review of Vivian's use of his name and reputation over the years since their divorce. What she discovered was grounds for multiple civil lawsuits. Vivian had been representing herself as Harold's business partner in several social and professional contexts, had used his name to secure credit and business relations, and had even claimed to be involved in Pemberton Dynamics charitable giving in ways that could create legal liability for Harold. Rebecca filed cease and desist letters with every creditor, business partner, and social organization that Vivian had misrepresented her relationship with Harold. The letters made it clear that any further use of Harold's name or reputation would result in immediate legal action, and that any existing business relationships based on Vivian's misrepresentations should be terminated immediately. The effect was devastating. Within a week, Vivian lost her remaining consulting clients, her membership in several social organizations, and her credit relationships with local businesses that had extended her favorable terms based on her claimed connection to Harold's success. Harold's most sophisticated response involved Vivian's criminal defense situation. Through Rebecca, he arranged for the district attorney's office to receive a comprehensive file documenting Vivian's months of harassment, including the security footage of her breaking into our house, recordings of her inappropriate phone calls to my workplace, and witness statements from neighbors who'd observed her surveillance behavior. The file painted a picture of escalating criminal behavior that went far beyond the single incident of ring theft. It showed a pattern of stalking, harassment, breaking and entering, and attempted intimidation that suggested Vivian posed a continuing threat to our safety and well-being. Harold also arranged for the DA's office to understand the full context of Vivian's financial situation and her history of fraud and misrepresentation. This information was crucial because it established motive for her behavior and showed that her actions weren't isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern of entitled criminal conduct. The most elegant aspect of Harold's response was that none of it involved anything illegal, unethical, or even particularly aggressive. He simply used legitimate business relationships, legal processes, and factual information to ensure that Vivian faced the natural consequences of her own behavior. Every action Harold took was something that would have happened eventually anyway, He just accelerated the timeline and ensured that the consequences all arrived simultaneously. Within 2 weeks of her arrest, Vivian's carefully constructed life of lies and manipulation had completely collapsed. She was facing criminal charges, losing her house, dealing with multiple civil lawsuits, and discovering that the reputation she'd built through deception was being systematically dismantled by people who had the resources to expose the truth. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was that Harold made sure everyone in Vivian's social and professional circles understood exactly why these consequences were occurring. He didn't engage in gossip or public humiliation, but he did ensure that the truth about Vivian's behavior was documented and available to anyone who needed to understand why her life was falling apart so dramatically. Vivian had spent months believing that she could manipulate and control our family without facing any real consequences. Harold's response taught her that some people have the resources to hold others accountable in ways that extend far beyond what most people can imagine. 3 months later, as I sit here recording this story, the consequences of that Sunday dinner are still unfolding in ways that none of us could have predicted. Vivian's world didn't just collapse, it imploded so completely that she's become a cautionary tale in our community about what happens when entitlement and manipulation finally meet immovable boundaries. The criminal case proceeded exactly as Harold's legal team had orchestrated. With the comprehensive documentation they provided to the district attorney's office, Vivian's defense attorney quickly realized that fighting the charges would be futile. The security footage of her breaking into our house, combined with months of documented harassment and the undeniable evidence of the ring theft, created an overwhelming case for the prosecution. Vivian ultimately accepted a plea agreement that resulted in an 8-month jail sentence, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. She was also required to pay full restitution for the damaged property from the break-in, undergo mandatory psychological counseling, and comply with a permanent restraining order that prohibits any contact with Cameron or me for the next 5 years. But the most telling aspect of Vivian's reaction to her conviction was her complete inability to accept responsibility for her actions. During her sentencing hearing, she gave a rambling statement to the judge that blamed everyone except herself, me for being ungrateful and materialistic, Cameron for being weak and easily manipulated, Harold for being vindictive and controlling, and even the justice system for being biased against mothers who were just trying to protect their children. Judge Patricia Kellerman, who had clearly seen enough entitled defendants in her courtroom to recognize the pattern, was notably unimpressed by Vivian's victim narrative. "Mrs. Thornfield," she said during sentence, "you've had multiple opportunities throughout these proceedings to take responsibility for your criminal behavior, and instead you've chosen to blame everyone except the person who made the decision to break into someone's home, steal their property and physically assault them. Your complete lack of remorse suggests that you pose a continuing danger to the victims, and that a substantial period of incarceration is necessary to protect the community." Vivian's financial situation deteriorated even more rapidly than her legal problem. The foreclosure on her Hillcrest house proceeded exactly as Pinnacle Lending Group had promised, and when the property was sold at auction, it didn't even cover the outstanding mortgage balance. Vivian was left owing the bank over $73,000 in deficiency judgment, which was added to her already overwhelming debt burden. The loss of her house forced Vivian to confront the reality that her lifestyle had been completely unsustainable for years. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a much less prestigious part of town, driving a 10-year-old sedan that she managed to purchase with her remaining savings. The contrast between her new circumstances and the image she'd maintained for so long was so stark that several people in her former social circles didn't even recognize her when they encountered her at grocery stores or other everyday locations. But perhaps the most devastating consequence for Vivian was the complete loss of her carefully cultivated social status. The cease and desist letters that Harold's legal team had sent to every organization where Vivian had misrepresented her connection to his success resulted in her being quietly but firmly excluded from the social circles that had defined her identity for over a decade. The Willowbrook Springs Historical Society, where Vivian had served on the board for 8 years, asked for her resignation after learning about her criminal conviction and the misrepresentations about her relationship to Harold's business interests. The charity organizations where she'd volunteered made it clear that her services were no longer needed, and the country club where she'd maintained a membership for 15 years declined to renew her annual contract. The social isolation was compounded by the fact that many of Vivian's former friends and acquaintances had been deceived by her lies about her financial situation and her relationship to Harold's success. When the truth about her circumstances became public through the legal proceedings, several people felt manipulated and used, particularly those who had extended credit or social courtesies based on Vivian's false representation. What makes Vivian's situation even more tragic is that she still refuses to acknowledge the role her own choices played in creating these consequences. According to Cameron's aunt Patricia, who has maintained minimal contact with Vivian out of family obligation, she continues to blame Harold for orchestrating her downfall and maintains that she was the victim of wealthy people using their power to destroy someone who dared to question their behavior. Vivian has filed 3 separate lawsuits against Harold, Pemberton Dynamics, and even against Cameron and me, claiming harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. All 3 lawsuits were dismissed by judges who found them to be frivolous and potentially sanctionable, but Vivian continues to appeal these dismissals and search for attorneys willing to take her cases on contingent. The most disturbing aspect of Vivian's ongoing behavior is her inability to leave us alone, despite the restraining order and her criminal conviction. She can't contact us directly, but she's found indirect ways to continue her harassment campaign. She's created fake social media accounts to monitor our online activity, sent messages through mutual acquaintances asking about our well-being, and even hired a private investigator to gather information about our daily routines and activities. Last month, we discovered that Vivian had been calling my school district's Human Resources Department, using different names and claiming to be concerned parents who had heard disturbing rumors about one of their teachers. She was apparently hoping to create enough complaints to trigger an investigation that might affect my employment, but fortunately, Mrs. Rodriguez and the district administration recognized the pattern and documented the harassment, rather than taking the complaint seriously. Cameron's relationship with his extended family has been permanently altered by these events, though not always in the ways we expected. Some family members initially criticized our decision to press criminal charges against Vivian, suggesting that family conflicts should be resolved privately rather than through the legal system. However, as the full scope of Vivian's deception and criminal behavior became public through the court proceedings, most of these critics came to understand that we'd had no choice but to involve law enforcement. Cameron's aunt Patricia, who had initially been sympathetic to Vivian's claims of persecution, apologized to both of us after reading the police reports and court documents. "I had no idea how serious this was," she told Cameron during a difficult phone conversation. "When Vivian called me crying about how you'd had her arrested, I thought it was some kind of family misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. I didn't know about the months of stalking, the break-in, or the financial fraud. I'm sorry I doubted your judgment." Harold's response to the entire situation has been characteristically measured but resolute. He's made it clear to everyone in the family that anyone who chooses to maintain a relationship with Vivian is free to do so, but that he won't tolerate any attempts to pressure Cameron or me to reconcile with her or minimize the seriousness of her behavior. "Vivian made her choices," Harold told the family during a gathering last month. "She chose to harass my son and daughter-in-law, she chose to commit crimes against them, and she chose to blame everyone except herself when she faced consequence. Those were her decisions, and she needs to live with the results. Anyone who thinks family loyalty requires enabling criminal behavior has fundamentally misunderstood what family is supposed to mean." For Cameron and me, the aftermath of this ordeal has been both healing and challenging. On one hand, we're relieved that Vivian is no longer able to terrorize us with constant harassment and surveillance. The restraining order and her conviction have given us legal protection, and Harold's comprehensive response has ensured that she lacks the resources and social connections to cause the kind of systematic damage she was attempting before. On the other hand, we're still dealing with the psychological impact of having been stalked and attacked by someone we'd tried to love and accept as family. I still check the security cameras obsessively. I'm hyper-aware of my surroundings when I'm alone, and I sometimes wake up at night thinking I've heard someone trying to get into our house. The anniversary ring itself has taken on complicated symbolism since the attack. When I first put it back on after retrieving it from under Vivian's refrigerator, it felt tainted by the memory of seeing it on her finger and hearing her claim that she deserved it more than I did. But over time, I've come to see it as a symbol of resilience rather than violation, proof that love and commitment can survive even the most determined attempts to destroy them. Cameron has struggled with guilt about his mother's behavior, questioning whether he should have recognized the warning signs earlier or set firmer boundaries before the situation escalated to criminal activity. I've tried to help him understand that Vivian's manipulation was sophisticated and that even mental health professionals can be deceived by skilled manipulators, but the process of accepting that his mother is genuinely dangerous has been emotionally devastating for him. As for what comes next, we're taking things one day at a time while remaining vigilant about our safety and security. Vivian will be released from jail in 5 months, and while the restraining order and probation requirements should prevent direct contact, we're realistic about the possibility that she'll find new ways to cause problems in our lives. Harold has assured us that his legal and security teams will continue monitoring the situation, and that any violations of the restraining order or attempts to resume harassment will be met with swift and comprehensive responses. Vivian had her chance to learn from consequences, he told us recently. If she chooses to continue this behavior when she's released, she'll discover that the consequences become more severe, not less. The most important lesson I've learned from this nightmare is that sometimes protecting yourself and your family requires accepting that some people will never change, no matter how much love, patience, or understanding you offer them. Vivian Thornfield chose manipulation over honesty, entitlement over respect, and criminal behavior over accepting boundaries. Those were her choices, and the consequences that followed were the natural result of those choices. I'm sharing this story not for sympathy or revenge, but because I want other people in similar situations to understand that they don't have to accept abuse disguised as family concern, and that seeking help from law enforcement and legal systems isn't betraying family, it's protecting it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.